There are 7 distinct American megaliths and engineering anomalies that have emerged clearly from the research. Here is the complete script. 7 structures on American soil, built before the United States existed, some built before Rome. And every single one of them should not be there, according to the engineering and the timelines we've been taught. That's not an opinion. That's the data. We're not talking about rough stone piles in the woods or vague shapes that require a lot of imagination. We're talking about structures where the numbers, the raw, measurable, physical numbers, simply do not line up with the official explanation of who built them, when, and how. And in some cases, the mainstream version doesn't even attempt an answer. It just moves on and hopes you don't notice. You noticed. That's probably why you're here. This channel covers the engineering impossibilities of the ancient world. And today, we're not going to Egypt, we're not going to Peru, we're staying right here. Right in the country that tells you it's only a few hundred years old. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is the kind of thing we cover every week. Structures that don't fit, timelines that don't add up, the data the textbooks quietly skip over. Hit that button and come along for the long haul. Now, let's start with number 1. Monk's Mound, Collinsville, Illinois, 12 miles east of St. Louis. The official version says it's a Native American earthwork, a platform mound built by the Mississippian culture, constructed starting around 900 AD and completed roughly by 1100 AD. Fine, that's the version. Now look at the numbers. Monk's Mound is the largest prehistoric earthen structure in the Western Hemisphere. It rises 100 feet, 10 stories from the surrounding plain. Its base covers 14 acres. For reference, that's roughly the same footprint as the Great Pyramid of Giza at its base. In terms of perimeter, it's actually larger than the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan in Mexico. And it was built with dirt, moved in baskets, by hand. Estimates say the mound contains more than 25 million cubic feet of earth. One calculation, working from the weight of packed clay at around 100 pounds per cubic foot, puts the total mass at approximately 2 billion pounds. If workers were moving earth in 50-pound basket loads, which is a generous estimate for sustained manual labor that's over 43 million individual trips. The core mound, according to more recent chronological analysis by archaeologist Timothy Schilling, was likely constructed within about 100 years, not over many centuries, as earlier theories assumed. 100 years. With no wheel, no draft animals, no metal tools. Sit with that number for a moment. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Monk's Mound wasn't alone. The ancient city of Cahokia, which surrounded it, originally contained around 120 individual earthen mounds spread across 6 square miles. To build the entire complex, workers moved an estimated 55 million cubic feet of earth total. The Grand Plaza alone, a deliberately flattened and leveled ceremonial space, covered 50 acres. Soil studies confirmed it wasn't naturally flat. The land was originally undulating terrain that someone systematically engineered flat. At its peak around 1100 AD, Cahokia had a population estimated between 15,000 and 20,000 people. That made it, at that moment in time, one of the largest cities on Earth, larger than contemporary London. Then, within a few centuries, it was completely abandoned. The people dispersed. And by the time European explorers arrived, no one in the region had any idea who built it. The official story doesn't explain the speed, it doesn't explain the scale. It doesn't explain the disappearance. Coincidence? Possibly. But a coincidence that sits suspiciously close to a story that hasn't been fully told. Now let's move 700 miles south to Louisiana. Poverty Point. Northeastern Louisiana, near the Mississippi River floodplain. This one doesn't get nearly enough attention. The site dates to between 1,700 and 1,100 BC. That's 3,700 years ago. It was built, and this is the part that stops researchers cold, by hunter-gatherers, not a farming civilization. Not a settled agricultural society with grain surpluses and a formal labor hierarchy. Hunter-gatherers. People who, by every prior assumption in mainstream archaeology, were not supposed to be capable of this kind of organized, large-scale construction. The site covers more than 400 acres. It consists of 5 mounds and 6 concentric semi-elliptical ridges, enormous C-shaped berms of earth, arranged around a central plaza. UNESCO designated it a World Heritage Site in 2014. The National Park Service estimates that landscape preparation and earthworks construction required moving approximately 53 million cubic feet of soil. 53 million cubic feet. No wheel, no metal. No agriculture-based labor pool. And then there's Mound A, the largest of the mounds, which stands 72 feet tall and covers roughly 7 acres. Archaeologist Tristram Kidder at Washington University published research indicating that this particular mound was not built over centuries, as the standard model assumed. The data suggests it was built in a matter of months. Months. By people who had no permanent settlement, no surplus food economy to sustain a mass labor force, and no known administrative structure capable of organizing that kind of effort. Kidder himself acknowledged this directly. Hunter-gatherers, in his words, aren't supposed to be able to do these activities. And yet there it is, sitting in Louisiana, older than most of what we call civilization. The official version doesn't have an explanation that holds up under the math. What it has is a category, and it hopes the category is enough. It isn't. Let's move now to something very different. Not a mound, a single man, and an engineering problem that has never been satisfactorily solved. Coral Castle, Homestead, Florida, built in the 20th century, and that's exactly what makes it so disorienting. Between approximately 1923 and 1951, a Latvian immigrant named Edward Leeds Skalnin, 5 feet tall, roughly 100 pounds, with a fourth grade education and no documented engineering training, quarried, transported, carved, and set more than 1,100 tons of oolite limestone by himself, mostly at night, with no crew, no heavy machinery, and no witness method of stone movement. The stones average 15 tons each. The largest individual stone weighs 30 tons. There are 2 monoliths standing 25 feet tall. He built a 30-ton telescope pointed precisely at the North Star. And here's the number that engineers still cannot get past: the gate. He carved a 9-ton revolving gate, 8 feet tall, that was so perfectly balanced at its center point that a child could push it open with one finger. It operated that way for decades, from its construction until 1986, when the bearing finally failed. At that point, engineers were called in to repair it. It took 6 men and a 50-ton crane to lift the gate for inspection. When they examined the mechanism, they found Leeds Skalnin had drilled a hole through the center of the 9-ton stone with such precision that the entire weight rested on a single truck bearing perfectly centered. The gate fit within a quarter inch of the surrounding walls. Even with a modern understanding of what he did, engineers were unable to restore it to rotate with the same ease it had under his construction. And when people asked how he did it, not just the gate, but all of it, he gave the same answer every time. I understand the laws of weight and leverage, and I know the secrets of the people who built the pyramids. He said that, repeatedly. And then he died in 1951 and took everything with him. Now, is Coral Castle evidence of lost ancient technology? That's a question, not a statement. What it is, without question, is a documented, physical proof that an individual with minimal formal education and only primitive tools could move and position stone with a precision that challenges modern engineers. If one man in the 20th century could do this, what does that say about what organized, highly motivated ancient cultures could do? And what might they have known that we've lost? That's the question Coral Castle forces onto the table. Let's stay in the eastern United States, but go back much further. Serpent Mound, Adams County, Ohio. The official version: a Native American earthwork, likely built by the Fort Ancient culture around 1070 AD. Though some researchers argue for an earlier date tied to the Adena culture, possibly as far back as 300 BC. The dating remains genuinely contested in the academic literature. The structure is a quarter-mile-long effigy mound shaped like an uncoiling serpent. The body winds in 7 curves, with what appears to be an oval feature at the head interpreted by some as a mouth swallowing an egg, by others as simply the head of the animal. The mound stands between 4 and 5 feet tall and ranges from 20 to 25 feet wide. Now, here's what the textbook doesn't lead with. The entire serpent is astronomically aligned. The head of the serpent points directly toward the setting sun on the summer solstice. The coils, when surveyed carefully, correspond to additional solar and lunar sightlines across the year. Researcher William Romaine, who has done extensive archaeoastronomical survey work at the site, found alignments to the summer solstice sunset, the winter solstice sunrise, and the spring and fall equinox sunsets, all embedded in the geometry of a single earthen serpent, stretched across a quarter-mile of Ohio landscape. For that to be accidental would require a remarkable coincidence. For it to be intentional requires something we don't usually ascribe to the builders, the textbooks describe: sophisticated astronomical knowledge, precise surveying capability, and the organizational will to execute it at scale. There's a further wrinkle. The mound sits directly atop a geological formation caused by a meteor impact, a crypto-explosion structure. Whether the builders knew this and chose the location deliberately, or whether it's coincidence, remains unresolved. But it is a fact. The Serpent was built on astronomically significant ground that was also geologically unique. The official version calls it a ceremonial site and moves on. It doesn't explain the alignments in detail. It doesn't address what kind of surveying allowed a quarter-mile effigy to encode multiple astronomical sightlines simultaneously. And here's where it gets really interesting. Connected to Serpent Mound, not physically, but culturally and geometrically, are the Newark earthworks, also in Ohio. Built by the Hopewell culture roughly 2,000 years ago, the Newark earthworks were, at their peak, the largest system of geometric earthworks in the ancient world. Not in Ohio, not in North America, in the world. The original complex covered more than 4 square miles. It contained perfectly formed geometric shapes, circles, octagons, and parallel-walled avenues on a scale that would challenge modern surveying equipment. The central feature is an octagon enclosing 50 acres, connected to a circle enclosing 20 acres. Archaeoastronomers, including Professors Ray Hively and Robert Horn of Earlham College, published research showing that the octagon at Newark is precisely oriented to encode the full 18.6-year lunar cycle, the complete wobble of the moon's orbital path as seen from Earth. Not just one lunar alignment, all 8 of the moon's extreme rising and setting positions across the full cycle. That is a level of astronomical observation that requires watching the sky across at least one full 18.6-year cycle before construction even begins. And then executing the geometry in Earth at 4 square miles without metal instruments, without written notation we know of, and without anything that mainstream archaeology is comfortable calling an advanced scientific culture. The official version calls it a ceremonial complex. The astronomical data calls it something considerably more precise than that. We're now 6 out of 7. Let's close with the one that sits alone in the mountains of Wyoming, at nearly 10,000 feet, buried under snow for most of the year, and only accessible for a few months each summer. The Bighorn Medicine Wheel. Medicine Mountain, Wyoming. Perched on a ridge inside Bighorn National Forest, the Medicine Wheel is a stone structure, roughly 80 feet in diameter, with 28 spokes radiating from a central cairn. 6 additional cairns sit along the outer rim. The whole thing is built from loose stone placed directly on the mountain surface, with no mortar, no cutting, no shaping. On the surface, that sounds modest, until you look at the astronomy. In the 1970s, astronomer John Eddy of the National Center for Atmospheric Research analyzed the alignments of the spokes and cairns. He found that specific alignments marked the summer solstice sunrise, and also corresponded to the rising positions of 3 bright stars, Aldebaran, Rigel, and Sirius. At the time the wheel was likely constructed. These stars served, in effect, as a star calendar. Their first heliacal risings, the first moment they're visible at dawn each year, were spaced roughly 28 days apart, roughly corresponding to the lunar month. And there are 28 spokes. Now here's the detail that gets ignored. The site is at 9,640 feet elevation. It's one of the most inaccessible places in Wyoming. Snow covers it from October through May every year. Whoever built it traveled to nearly 10,000 feet at a time before horses were available on the Great Plains to construct a precise astronomical instrument out of loose stone on a windswept ridge. And it predates the Crow people, the tribe most closely associated with the region today. The Crow themselves don't know who built it. That detail that the local indigenous people say it predates their own history, there's the kind of data point that never quite makes it into the standard narrative. Lay the data points side by side now. 1. Monk's Mound. A base footprint matching the Great Pyramid. More than 2 billion pounds of earth moved in baskets. No wheel, no animal labor. Built according to revised chronology in roughly 100 years. Then the entire civilization vanishes. 2. Poverty Point. 53 million cubic feet of earth moved by hunter-gatherers with no agricultural surplus economy, no administrative hierarchy we can identify, and the main mound, according to soil analysis, possibly built in months. 3. Coral Castle. 1 man, 100 pounds, 4th grade education. Moved 1,100 tons of stone. Built a 9-ton gate that required a 50-ton crane and 6 men to merely lift for inspection. Said repeatedly he knew the secrets of the pyramid builders. Took those secrets to his grave. 4. Serpent Mound. A quarter-mile effigy encoding solar alignments at the summer solstice, winter solstice, and equinoxes, built on the site of a meteor impact crater in a design that required precision surveying capability we have no documented evidence for. 5. The Newark Earthworks. 4 square miles of geometric earthworks, the largest in the ancient world, encoding the complete 18 6-year lunar cycle in their geometry. Built 2,000 years ago by a culture archaeology is reluctant to call astronomically sophisticated. 6. The Bighorn Medicine Wheel. An astronomical instrument at nearly 10,000 feet, encoding stellar calendars and lunar counts in its spoke geometry, built by a culture that predates even the local indigenous oral history. No one knows who built it, not even the tribes who consider it sacred. 7. Mystery Hill, Salem, New Hampshire. Called America's Stonehenge. Not because it looks like it, but because over 30 acres of dry stone chambers, walls, and standing stones align with solar and lunar events, including the summer and winter solstices and the equinoxes. Carbon dating at the site has returned dates going back as far as 2,000 years. The oracle chamber contains an acoustic feature, a speaking tube carved into the stone that allows a voice spoken from inside to project outward to a specific point on the grounds. That's not accidental geometry. That's acoustic engineering. In stone, with no documentation of who did it or why. 7 sites in the United States, each of them presenting data that the mainstream version either cannot explain or quietly declines to engage with. Here is the inversion that reorganizes everything. We are taught that American civilization began with European contact, that what came before was scattered, simple, pre-literate, and limited in capacity. The data at these 7 sites says something different. It says that what came before was organized enough to move tens of millions of cubic feet of Earth on tight timelines, sophisticated enough to encode multi-decade astronomical cycles in geometry, precise enough to balance 9-ton stones to tolerances a modern machine shop would respect, and deliberate enough to place a serpent's head toward the solstice sunset and a stone wheel toward the rising of Aldebaran from a mountain no one had to climb. We think the story of North America begins around 1492. The data says it starts considerably earlier. And someone, somewhere, understood things about the sky, about stone, and about the organization of human effort that we have been very comfortable pretending they didn't know. That's not a theory. That's what the structures are still saying, if you're willing to stand still long enough to listen. The question isn't whether these people were capable. The question is why we were so eager to believe they weren't. There's more beneath the surface of every site on this list, literally. Ground-penetrating radar surveys at Cahokia have suggested subsurface features that haven't been excavated. The area beneath the Newark Octagon has barely been touched. And at Poverty Point, the NPS notes that less than 1% of the site has ever been disturbed by excavation. Less than 1%. What the ground has given up so far already broke the model. The rest is still waiting. That's what this channel goes after next. The ground that hasn't been opened yet and what the instruments are already picking up from above it. If that's where your curiosity just went, this is the right place.